Order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. This is the first hearing for the Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Activities Subcommittee of the 119th Congress. I'm honored to serve as chairman of this important subcommittee. We have a few new members of the subcommittee on our side of the aisle. Mr. Offord from Missouri, Mr. Strong from Alabama, who will also serve as the subcommittee's vice chair, and Mr. Moore of West Virginia. We welcome each of you and the returning members, including Mr. Carter, Mr. Klein, Mr. Gonzalez, and Mr. Clyde. We're also lucky to have Congresswoman Meng serving as the ranking member of the subcommittee. Ranking member Meng has served on this subcommittee for several years now, and we will rely on her input and expertise as we move forward this year. She's joined by on her side by Mr. Ivey of Maryland, Mr. Morelli of New York, Ms. Dean of Pennsylvania, and Mr. Mervan of Indiana. So welcome to all returning and new members of the subcommittee. We will follow the 5-minute rule for questions. Of course, I don't plan on cutting anyone off in a mid-sentence. I'll recognize members in order of seniority based on who's present at the beginning of the hearing, going back and forth between parties. For those arriving after I strike the gavel, I will recognize you in the order that you arrive, continuing to go back and forth between the parties. While I'm sure that we will not always agree on the issues before the subcommittee, all members and witnesses will be heard and respected. With that, I'd like to welcome our witness today, Associate Deputy Director Kathleen Toomey, to this oversight hearing on the Bureau of Prisons. She's no stranger to us because she's been serving this agency for a good bit. So thank you for taking the time to appear with us to discuss the Bureau's operations, challenges, and accountability to the American people. The BOP plays a critical role in maintaining public safety, ensuring secure and humane incarceration, and preparing inmates for reintegration into society. At a time when the federal prison system faces mounting challenges, ranging from staffing shortages to aging infrastructure to a growing inmate population, it's imperative that we examine how taxpayer dollars are being used to meet these needs. Today's hearing will allow us to assess BOP's progress and identify areas where improvements are necessary. Specifically, I want to discuss ongoing concerns relating to the agency's ability to recruit and retain qualified correctional officers, the conditions of confinement within federal facilities, and the Bureau's continued reliance on high-cost, low-staffing models that leave employees overworked and facilities vulnerable. A pressing issue we must address is the Bureau's growing inmate population and the increasing strain this places on its facilities. The rise in inmate numbers demands a careful assessment of whether BOP has the capacity, infrastructure, and staffing to manage this growth while maintaining safety and rehabilitation efforts. Additionally, we must discuss BOP's footprint across the country, ensuring that facilities are properly located and resourced to meet the current and future needs of our federal prison system. I remain encouraged by the Bureau's continued work on the proposed Letcher facility and look forward to seeing further progress on this critical project. The Bureau's approval of the Letcher County facility last October is an important step in addressing both capacity challenges and providing economic opportunities for the region. As BOP continues to assess and prioritize its infrastructure needs, ensuring that projects like Letcher stay on track is essential. We'll be watching this project closely, as its approval and completion will be an important factor in evaluating the Bureau's broader facility planning efforts. Finally, I fully recognize Congress has not yet completed fiscal year 25 funding, and that we are not yet in receipt of the fiscal year 2026 budget request. But I expect a candid discussion of the Bureau's budget needs based on historical trends. While we understand that maintaining secure and functional institutions requires resources, we must ensure that every dollar spent is justified. Additional funding cannot always be the answer. We must be creative in addressing the Bureau's needs while ensuring that strategic plans incorporate fiscally responsible solutions. Any long-term strategy must consider cost-effective approaches, improved resource allocation, and innovative management practices to maximize efficiency without excessive financial burdens. Associate Deputy Director Toomey, I look forward to your testimony and to an honest discussion of how the Bureau of Prisons can best fulfill its mission. Now I want to recognize Ranking Member Ming for any remarks she cares to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Although I've been on the subcommittee for several years, as was mentioned, this is my first hearing as ranking member. Chairman Rogers, I enjoyed our previous meetings, and I look forward to working closely with you and your team. I want to welcome the new members on our side, Mr. Ivy, Ms. Dean, and Mr. Mervan as new members of the subcommittee, and also welcome back Congressman Morelli. And also welcome to the new members on the Republican side, Mr. Alford, Mr. Strong, and Mr. Moore. I'm looking forward to working with all of our subcommittee members. On the matter at hand, Acting Deputy Director Toomey, thank you for being here. You have a difficult job, and it seems to be getting more challenging each day. First and foremost, the BOP has been facing staffing shortfalls for years, including amongst correctional officers. This understaffing problem risks creating a dangerous situation for officers and inmates alike. Corrections work is tough, dangerous work in the best of circumstances. But on a bad day, officers or inmates can be injured or even killed. So I can say with no exaggeration, I view the staffing issues facing the BOP as a life and death matter. We must do better, not only in protecting the life and safety of our corrections officers and the inmates at the 120 BOP facilities, but also in terms of ensuring the success of the First Step Act. According to the GAO, 45% of people released from federal prison are rearrested or return within 3 years, which raises questions about how effectively BOP is implementing and administering the First Step Act. Over 12,000 corrections officers go to work in our federal prison system every day. As I said, they do a very difficult and dangerous job. They are joined by thousands more staff who are not frontline officers, but are there to teach, provide medical care, and psychological care, some of whom may be brought onto guard duty through the process known as augmentation. While I know that BOP's staff are set up for any task assigned to them, the reality is that when folks who are there to help prisoners in other ways get augmented into working as guards, they're not teaching life skills or trades to inmates. and that jeopardizes progress under the bipartisan First Step Act. Make no mistake, we need to keep our communities safe. People who have harmed their communities and remain a danger to their communities should be locked up. But as the cost of incarceration continues to rise, it does not do us any good if recidivism rates remain as high as GAO says they are. Again, the Bureau has to do better. Finally, even with the problems facing BOP, this administration is seeking to further complicate BOP's operating posture by proposing to house detained migrants in BOP facilities. This proposal raises legal questions about housing civil detainees as criminals, and of critical importance to this subcommittee, this plan could require hundreds of millions of dollars to house another 6,000 migrants in BOP facilities, further straining all aspects of the prison system. Acting Deputy Director, I understand you are not the architect of this plan, but it will have a dramatic impact on the Bureau. This subcommittee will need many more details about how this concept of a plan is to be implemented. I understand that these problems did not develop overnight. Over the last 20 years, the DOJ Inspector General has issued over 100 reports detailing significant enterprise-wide issues facing the BOP. There's a lot of work to do to fix BOP's issues, even without the additional challenges of the migrant detention plan, the potential firing of probationary staff, and the funding limitations of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. These will only add more stress to the federal prison system at a time when it appears already dangerously close to the breaking point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Associate Deputy Director Toomey, you're recognized for an opening statement. Without objection, your written statement will be entered in the record, and we hope that you can summarize in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. Good afternoon, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Meng, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Federal Bureau of Prisons. BOP's mission is unique. We house, clothe, feed, educate, and provide medical care for the federal inmate population. There are over 153,000 federal offenders in our custody. We have over 36,000 employees, including nearly 1,600 brave correctional officers who ensure that 120 facilities across the country are safe, humane, and secure. Appropriately filling positions in every BOP facility is a top priority because it is essential for the well-being of our employees and the safety of those in our care. Our use of recruitment and retention incentives, direct hire authority, and sophisticated recruitment strategies are effective in filling vacant positions. In 2024, we had a net gain of 1,200 employees, our best year in a decade. In addition, overall staffing percentages for clinical medical positions and nurses are up 6% from last year. Despite this unprecedented progress, we still have more than 4,000 vacant positions. BOP uses recruitment and retention incentives and overtime pay to address its staffing shortage. Incentives and overtime pay are temporary measures for securing our institutions. Neither is a cost-effective long-term strategy for running an agency. In fiscal year 2024, we paid $229 million in incentives and $438 million in overtime. Since fiscal year 2024, BOP salaries have increased 7.2% due to mandatory pay raises. That's an average increase of $20 million per pay period. As a result, we have paused consideration of any new pay incentives, eliminated some existing incentives, and reduced overtime to the greatest extent possible, consistent with safety, security, and First Step Act implementation. We know that higher staffing levels make institutions safer. In 2024, a 35% retention incentive at Metropolitan Detention Center Brooklyn substantially increased staffing. That led to fewer lockdowns, decreased uses of force, and a safer institution. Insufficient staffing creates risk for employees and those in our care. For example, it can reduce inmate access to timely, quality medical care, and it can negatively impact the personal health of the people who work for us. While we continue to prioritize hiring, we are making we are making significant changes to reduce costs and maximize our use of existing resources. For example, we reduced all operating budgets by 20%, we've paused most employee training and travel, and we eliminated most free inmate phone calls, which were previously funded by the CARES Act. As with staffing, there is widespread consensus that our crumbling infrastructure endangers our employees and those in our care. BOP maintains 120 institutions, and every one needs repair. The department's Inspector General has found that many of our facilities are literally crumbling. This is a direct result of a growing list of unfunded modernization and repair needs. Across BOP, more than 4,000 beds are unusable due to dangerous conditions like leaking or failing roofs, mold, asbestos, or lead. 4,000 beds is the equivalent of 2 to 3 entire prisons. To help address the $3 billion modernization repair backlog, BOP developed a 5-year capital plan. That plan is structured to ensure all critical needs are systematically addressed. By breaking down the repair needs into specific categories by fiscal year, we carefully balance our use of existing funding to address known as well as emergent needs. Lastly, we greatly appreciate the recent support from Congress in providing $65 million to address BOP facilities damaged by major weather disasters. We will need the continued support of Congress to stabilize BOP, capitalize on our recent progress, and set us on a path to fulfill our mission of ensuring public safety and preparing inmates for release. Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Mang, and members of the subcommittee, BOP is a critical part of the federal criminal justice system. Our mission is extremely challenging, but so important to the safety and security of the public, those in our care, and our staff. I thank you for the opportunity to speak here today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Director Toomey, thank you for that summary. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions for the witness. I'll begin by recognizing myself. BOP facilities continue to experience significant staffing shortages. It's the top concern I hear from BOP employees who work at facilities in my district. Over the past few fiscal years, this subcommittee has outlined different actions the Bureau could and should explore to address this issue. What specific steps has the Bureau taken to recruit and retain correctional officers, particularly in hard-to-fill locations?
Thank you for the question, Chairman. BOP's undertaken a number of different steps. We have a National Recruitment Office that is charged with providing nationwide support for recruitment for BOP positions, but also provides specialized support to specific locations that are really struggling to hire. So currently, the National Recruitment Office provides additional support to about 27 institutions that are especially difficult to fill. And those institutions could be any place across the country. It could be urban areas, could be rural areas, but National Recruitment Office provides additional support to them in recruiting, in identifying applicants, and in providing whatever support they need for the recruitment efforts. Last May, the Bureau was successful in getting OPM approval for direct hire authority for corrections officers. That has proven extremely valuable in helping us to expedite the process for corrections officers, and it really streamlines the hiring process, and that has been a very, very successful tool that we've used. We have significantly increased our recruitment on social media, in the community. People at BOP are very, very creative about how to recruit for these jobs. You will often find wardens, managers, senior executives carrying business cards for the Bureau, handing them out to people who they think might be a good recruit, local nursing school, other types of things. So I think it's an all-hands-on-deck effort to recruit for positions. We have used recruitment incentives for corrections officers. The incentive has been $10,000 or 25% of the first year's salary, whichever is greater. We have also provide specialized incentives for medical positions or other difficult-to-fill positions.
What role has the Office of Personnel Management played in addressing these shortages? And do you believe direct hire authority is being utilized effectively?
Do I believe that direct hire authority is utilized effectively? Yes, I do.
How has the shortage of staff, how has that impacted safety at the prisons, both for correctional officers and for inmates? Have we seen an increase in violence as a result?
The shortage of staffing creates a number of different challenges and dangers in BOP facilities. We find that in facilities where there's a shortage, that we may have employees who are working mandatory overtime, that we often hear reports of employees who are exhausted, they're not getting enough sleep, and they simply don't have the ability to do as good a job as they might if they were receiving an appropriate amount of rest and time off of work. There are numerous Inspector General reports and GAO reports that have linked the shortage of staffing to employees not being able to provide the services that they ought to provide in the population. Shortage of staffing also leads to lockdown of facilities, so it can impact the ability of individuals to participate in First Step Act programming, to receive visits, to go to medical. It can impact any number of aspects of life really in a Bureau facility.
Can you provide an update on retention incentives and if and where implemented, whether they've had measurable success in reducing staffing gaps?
Yes, Congressman. So as I'm sure you know, we made an announcement yesterday that we are eliminating some retention incentives and we are reducing others by about 50%. We have had very good that announcement will impact about 27,000 people across BOP, 23,000 staff at 50 institutions. Retention incentives have been extremely valuable in keeping people on the job at BOP. We have a lot of places corrections officers are not paid very much. The starting salary was somewhere between $50,000 and $60,000, depending on where you live. And retention incentives have proven to be a very, very viable means of keeping people in what is a very, very difficult job.
Thank you, ma'am. I think the engineers are prepared to replace the mic, is that right? Yeah. We apologize for this, ma'am.
Testing. Is that working? Okay. Thank you.
Ms. May, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Toomey, you just talked about the new policy as of yesterday where BOP informed staff that it will reduce retention bonuses by 50% for most employees and end them completely for staff in 7 facilities, including Miami, which is about to receive an influx of detained migrants from ICE. It's my understanding that as part of this announcement, BOP will no longer be able to provide student loan repayment to new hires, which could have a devastating impact on your ability to recruit and retain medical staff. This is a cruel cut to the paychecks of a lot of hardworking men and women who protect our public safety every day. And as a result of these changes, I'm afraid that you'll see more staff quit, forcing the remaining staff to work more overtime and be augmented, and will no doubt eat up a lot of the savings from ending retention bonuses. We're in an extremely tight budget environment that may get even tighter if the administration continues the practice of impounding funds. I wanted to ask what's the rationale for this decision, and has DOJ submitted a reprogramming request under Section 505 for this proposal?
Thank you for the question. The rationale is simply that we cannot afford to continue paying incentives at the level that we're paying them. In 2023, fiscal year 2023, Congress gave BOP $164 million to fund retention incentives. Those were very effective, to fund incentives overall. That was very effective, and we've used that money very, very well. Last year, we took money from our base budget in addition to the $164 million, and we paid about $220 million in incentives. Last year, we also absorbed a 5% pay cut that we took out of our base budget. This year, there was another 2% pay raise that we've taken out of our base budget. We simply don't have the resources to continue paying incentives at a level beyond the $164 million appropriated by Congress. So the changes that we've made are to bring us back in line. So we will fully utilize the $164 million that Congress appropriated, but we do not have additional funding from our base budget to continue with those incentives.
Are there other steps that you are taking to manage costs outside of cutting staff paychecks at the facilities? For example, management level travel?
Yes, so this was a decision we really struggled over. It was not one made lightly, and it came only after we had undertaken a number of other significant steps to try to manage the budget. So in the last year, we eliminated all incentives for anyone in our central office, or the vast majority of them. We cut operating budgets for the central office divisions last year, and we've taken a number of other steps to reduce costs, first beginning in Washington with central office that would not impact the field. This year, we have had to make further and deeper cuts. So we've cut all operating budgets, but across the Bureau, which is about $130 million in savings. As I mentioned before, we eliminated free phone calls for inmates, except to the extent that they are used as incentives for First Step Act program. And we continue to pay those out of our dedicated First Step Act funds. We've saved $10 million by moving to lower costs drugs in some cases where it's medically appropriate, particularly those for medication-assisted treatment. We've canceled planned spending on technology, upgrades to medical equipment, food service equipment. We've looked every place across the Bureau that we can think of to try to identify cuts that we could take and reductions we could make before we got to the incentives.
Thank you. And I want to quickly talk about the First Step Act, which, as you know, was signed into law by President Trump in 2018. I'm concerned about further staffing reductions as a result of resignations will inevitably mean sharp reductions in BOP programs and activities for people under the First Step Act. Concerned that any further staffing reduction will create an even greater dependence on augmentation, which will take BOP skills teachers who should be helping to, in the long term, reduce recidivism. And just wanted to know your thoughts about that.
So the good news on the First Step Act is that last year, we have some dedicated positions funded from our First Step Act funding dedicated to First Step Act implementation, and we were able to almost double the number of onboard positions last year from about 350 to about 700. So those are paid out of FSA funding, and that doubled. We are working to continue programming to the greatest extent that we can. And as I've said, we're really working to identify additional cuts, additional savings, any place that we can that does not come directly from incentives or other things that impact staff. And we will continue to do that to try to manage as well as we can. With regards specifically to augmentation, everyone in Bureau leadership is aware of and understands the need to reduce our reliance on augmentation. I think the fundamental problem, especially to anyone who's new to BOP, is augmentation. When you're hired to work in an institution, you are hired as a law enforcement officer first. You attend training like any corrections officer, although maybe you're working a different job. So everyone has the same basic level of training. We are working to implement the requirements of the Federal Prison Oversight Act to reduce our reliance on augmentation. But when we don't use augmentation, then we have to pay overtime. And so that just contributes to overtime. So either the way to make sure posts are manned is either we have to have enough people, so we have to continue staffing and we have to be able to retain those people, or we augment, which takes someone away from their other duties but doesn't cost us extra money, or we don't augment and we pay overtime to pay the position. The only other choice is to lock down a housing unit, which then deprives all the individuals in our care in that housing unit of the ability to attend programming or engage in other productive activities, go to jobs, other things like that.
Judge Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Deputy Director Toomey, thank you very much for being here. There's been a notable rise in violent incidents within the federal facilities, particularly against correctional officers.
Yes.
What initiatives is BOP undertaking to ensure that violent offenders face immediate and severe consequences? Do current disciplinary policies need strengthening to deter such violence? And should there be stricter penalties for inmates who assault federal officers?
Thank you for the question. It is an issue that we take very, very seriously. I mean, I think the first answer to your question is when there are attacks on corrections officers, we work very closely with the FBI, the Department of Justice, U.S. Attorney's offices to ensure that violence of that type is prosecuted. We do the same for introduction of contraband in facilities, which can also lead to violence against corrections officers, right? The use of illicit drugs or other things in facilities. We have, I think that the question of whether penalties should be strengthened for those in our custody for various types of misconduct within the facility is really a question best left for the new director. What I will tell you is we have a well-developed framework for discipline of individuals who engage in any kind of misconduct in the Bureau, and we work very hard to make sure that that's implemented and followed.
I am a former state district judge and visited my prisoners in prison that I put over there. I did a lot of criminal work. Do these people get indicted and retried for the additional offense that they committed in prison?
Yes, they do.
And that's up to the FBI. They come in and investigate it, and they turn it over to the Justice Department.
We work closely with FBI to investigate those things. The Inspector General's office sometimes is involved in investigations depending on what it is. And we also work very closely with the U.S. Attorney's offices. So, we discuss with the U.S. Attorney's community the need to take those cases seriously, right? And to help us with those cases. And I think we're getting a good response from the U.S. Attorney community.
So that's what's supposed to happen now. We've got a big rise in these attacks. Have they been prosecuted and additional time given to these people in the last 18 months or 2 years?
There are a number of instances, yes, of individuals that have been tried for various violent acts within the Bureau, when they're in Bureau custody, yes, and they are tried and sentenced if they're found guilty, yes.
What, do you know what the offense for attempted murder is in I don't know the federal offense for it.
I don't know, I'm sorry, Congressman, yeah.
Well, if you need to make it rougher, I'll be glad to write a bill to make it tougher.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Morelli?
Yes, thank you for being here, and thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member, for holding this hearing. In your testimony, and you may have responded to this, I didn't think there was a question about the backlog of maintenance projects and the development of 5-year capital plan. I think you mentioned it in your testimony. Could you talk a little bit more about the different categories of infrastructure and facility maintenance repairs that are needed, and how you're prioritizing those projects?
Yes, thank you. So we have what we estimate to be a $3 billion modernization and repair backlog. Over the last year, we've developed a 5-year plan that would attack a large part of that, not the entire part. But we prioritized, in terms of developing that plan, we prioritized systems that would make institutions safer, make them more secure, stabilize the infrastructure, and also bring bed space back online. So those were the criteria that we used. The categories within that plan are things like safety systems, so fire alarms, sprinklers, fire pumps, duress systems, things, right, that we need to keep it safe. Roofs, there are 65 roofing projects just on that plan, on the 5-year plan. Security, so perimeter fencing, the controls that open doors in prisons, various types of other technology needed to keep the prison safe. And so those are just a few examples of the types of categories that we're using in the plan. So the plan sets out specific repairs at facilities by fiscal year and by the type of repair that it is. And our facilities team has worked hard to try to balance that across the country, across the types of repairs based on how urgent the need for repair is, while also maintaining some flexibility because we do have unexpected events, right? Bureau facilities are impacted by weather, other types of things that may cause us to have to reshuffle what's on the priority list in terms of what can get repaired.
So, and I think you mentioned bed space.
Yes.
I know in your testimony, again, you mentioned you have 153,000 in custody today. How does that compare to numbers just 5 years ago, or what the trend lines are? But you don't give an exact number, but
I think it's a slight increase over what it was 5 years ago. The 153,000 includes those who are in prison, as well as about 9,000 that are in residential reentry centers or in the community. So it's a combined number.
So is the bed space, is that due to an expectation that the population will grow, or is it just redesigning, or what is that exactly?
So the bed space issue is that we have facilities where it's simply not safe to have individuals in those beds. So you might visit a prison where there are 6 housing units, and 2 of them might be closed because they're simply not fit for use, and the other 4 may be open. And so our goal would be to bring the beds that are at existing facilities back online, right? So that we would have a greater ability to use the beds within our existing inventory.
Gotcha. And you talked a fair number about and mentioned just staffing. And I'm looking here, I thought I saw the number of correction officers you have now is roughly 16,000, a little under that? And it
That's-
was 19,000, I don't know why I can't find the number, but oh, right here, 19,000 in just a decade ago, a little under 16,000 now. Some of that, is that a result of not only retention efforts, but is the population gone down, or is there a need? What's the need, I guess, is probably the easiest way to ask it.
Okay, so the need for increased corrections officers. So we use right now a significant amount of overtime to cover
Right.
all of our posts. Some of that is due to the vacancies. Some of that is also due to, employees who are on board. They get sick, they take annual leave, they may go out for military duty, they may be out for any number of reasons. And so we also have the need to be able to cover for the vacancies caused by.
And what's the
yeah.
delta? I'm sorry, I'm skipping it only because I have a few seconds. So what would you, if you could just wave a magic wand, irrespective of maybe mandates from up above, what would you want staffing levels to be at for COs?
We estimate that we need about, let me get you the number, I have it right here. We estimate that we need about 3,000 more corrections officers than we are currently authorized for, and the authorized number is 20,446, and that includes the line corrections officer that you think of. It includes lieutenants, it includes people who work within the unit with inmates, and it covers a couple other positions other than what you just think of as line corrections
Yeah,
officers.
and the chair's been nice to indulge me, but, so would the number be 23,000, is that what you say?
Somewhere around there, yes,
Not
the 23.
23,000.
Yeah.
Mr.
Yeah,
Clyde?
thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Associate Deputy Director Toomey, for being here today. President Donald Trump has taken a multitude of bold actions since assuming office again on January 20th. One of these includes an executive order called Defending Women from Gender Ideology, Extremism, and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. This executive order injects common sense back into the federal government by recognizing that there are only two sexes and that an individual cannot change his or her God-given sex. Not only can people not pick their own sex, but taxpayer dollars should not be going towards feeding the gender dysphoria idea. It has been a little over a month since President Trump signed this executive order. So, Associate Deputy Director Toomey, can you tell me how the Bureau of Prisons is working to comply with this executive order, and what steps have you taken?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. Yes, so the Bureau is working closely with the department to implement the executive order. We have made a number of policy changes consistent with the order to update our policies to comply with the order. I will say that there are a number of pending lawsuits involving this issue, and so we are working with the department to implement to the extent that we can, while also consistent with the temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions that have been issued in those cases.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a cost estimate of how much taxpayer funds were used during the Biden-Harris administration on transgender surgeries for prisoners?
There were 2 surgeries during that period, one in 2022 and one in 2023, and the total cost was about $400,000.
About $400,000, okay. So with this new directive for prisoners, will taxpayer funds continue to be used for transgender surgeries?
We are no longer referring inmates for those surgeries.
Okay, great, thank you. When my colleague had mentioned staffing, so your current authorized level is 20,446, if I
That's
heard
correct,
correct.
yes.
And where are you at right now? What's your current staffing, 19 or somewhere in there?
Now, let me get it for you. Our current staffing is, our on-board is 15,992.
15,992, so almost 16,000. So you have a 4,000, almost 4,500 shortfall of staffing from 15,992, almost 16,000 to 20,446.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Is your current budget sufficient to cover that 4,500 employee increase if you had those employees on board right now?
It is not.
It is not. Okay. Do you have an idea of how many it would cover, your current budget?
Of the 4,500,
Right, of
roughly
the-
4,500, about 3,100 of those vacancies are funded.
Okay,
The question of exactly how many more people we could pay and bring on board would assume that if we increase staffing, we could decrease overtime.
okay,
And that we would gain some savings from overtime, so we could increase staffing, but some overtime there's not, some of the overtime is driven by the need to take inmates to the outside community for medical care, and that is not something that will be driven down by having more corrections officers.
okay. So that 3,100 that is funded, since you don't have those employees right now, what happens to that money?
It's being paid out in overtime, and it's being paid out in incentives.
Okay, so it's not being returned to the treasury or anything like that?
No.
Okay, all right. And lastly, I want to move on and focus on how the Bureau of Prisons is working with DHS and immigrations to enforce President Trump's historic actions on immigration and closing the southern border. It's my understanding that earlier this month, the Bureau of Prisons entered into a non-binding agreement with DHS and ICE that states that those detained by ICE will be housed in several federal detention centers across the country. So can you shed light on how the Bureau of Prisons is working with DHS and ICE on this matter?
We've entered an interagency agreement with ICE, as you noted. It allows ICE to place detainees in 5 BOP facilities: Miami, Atlanta, Leavenworth, Philadelphia, and Berlin. There are currently detainees in the first 4 of those: Miami, Atlanta, Leavenworth, and Philadelphia. The IAA provides for DHS to fully reimburse BOP for its costs associated with housing those individuals.
Okay, all right. How many individuals do you have, do you know?
As of this morning, there are about 700.
Mr. Dean?
Thank you. And I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman. It is my honor to be on this subcommittee. So thank you, Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Mang. And thank you, Associate Deputy Director Toomey, for your testimony, for your work, for being here with us. And I want to thank the dedicated federal employees with whom you work on a daily basis. Thank you. I know some here in the audience. We are inspired by your incredibly challenging work under incredibly challenging circumstances. First question I wanted to ask you about is about substance use in prison, drugs in prison, illicit materials in prison. We know that's an issue, whether it's in our state prisons locally, but in the federal prisons as well. Research cited by the National Institute on Drug Abuse suggests that at, quote, estimated 65% of United States prison population has an active addiction, a substance use disorder. Another 20% did not meet that criteria for substance use disorder, but were under the influence of drugs or alcohol at the time they committed the crime. According to a report issued by the Department of Justice Office of Inspector General last year, it's called Evaluating of Issues Surrounding Inmate Deaths in Federal Bureau of Prisons. Of the 344 inmate deaths at the Bureau of Prisons, and this is for 2014 through 21, 70 involved drug overdose. And we know in the non-prison population, we have a daily issue of drug overdose. Director Toomey, what are the primary pathways that illicit substances get into the institutions, and what can you do about it?
Thank you very much for the question, Congresswoman. So there are numerous pathways that the contraband can come in. One is by drones. It could come in with people simply throwing things over the fence. That happens with some regularity. It can be smuggled in by visitors. It can come in through the mail. It can come in through a staff member who's bringing in something that they shouldn't be bringing in. We have a number of ways that we've been trying to attack this problem because it is a serious, serious problem that endangers both the employees and those in our custody. We have drone detection software technology at 69, I think, of our facilities, and that allows us to identify drones, know when they're attempting to drop contraband, and sometimes we're able to recover the drone. Otherwise, even if it's a sighting, the staff can go out and try to find whether something was dropped.
So not available at all of your facilities?
Not available at all of our facilities, no.
And we're talking about staffing, we're talking about resources, so you would need more of that. I know there's more for you to tell me there, but I want to flip to the treatment side.
Sure.
Regarding inmates getting access to substance use disorder treatment. What are the successes? Where do you have programs? We know that under the First Step Act, which was signed by President Trump at the end of December 18, it directed BOP to expand inmate access to Medicaid-assisted treatment. Do you have programs for everybody who is struggling with addiction?
We have many, many programs. We have residential drug treatment programs. We have non-residential programs. We offer treatment for those in the community once they release to residential reentry center. We have drug education courses. In fiscal year 2024, almost 80,000 inmates participated in drug treatment programs.
And what impact does that have when people get treatment for addiction and mental health? What impact does that have on recidivism?
I think that what our medical providers would tell you is that it has a very significant impact on individuals' conduct within the facility and also increases their likelihood of successfully reintegrating into the community without drug abuse issues.
And finally, on the area of retention incentive pay, you have told us a lot about that. I was interested in what you began in your testimony about your experience at Brooklyn. Can you tell us what happened there? And what was the outcome of it? What should we as appropriators know about that so that as we are planning and appropriating for you and your work, that we can employ and retain more folks in this system?
So Brooklyn, I think, is a very good example of how well retention incentives can work. Brooklyn was a place that had struggled to hire for a very, very long time. It's a high cost of living urban area. They had a lot of difficulty attracting staff and retaining them. So even when you get them in the door, they sometimes leave because the pay was not competitive for the local area. So we implemented a 35% retention incentive at Brooklyn last spring, about a year ago now.
Is that on their pay?
That is on their pay. It's at 35% in addition to their pay. That led to 87 additional hires at Brooklyn, which was the highest they had had in many, many years. It significantly increased staffing levels for corrections officers and also for medical staff. Medical staff is up well over 90%, which it hasn't been there in a very long time. It also decreased the use of lockdowns for staffing. Brooklyn was a place that used to lock down, could be every weekend, many times during the week, because there simply were not enough corrections officers to work those housing units. And so Brooklyn had, since August 2024, Brooklyn has had 3 days of lockdowns for staffing shortages total. And that was, so it's a massive improvement.
Are you able to continue that with the Brooklyn example?
Yeah, so yes, so that continues, yeah.
Terrific, and I recognize I'm over
Mr.
my
Klein?
time. Thank you.
Thank you, Associate Director Toomey. In September of 2024, the DOJ's Office of Inspector General released a report titled Audit of the Federal Bureau of Prisons Management of the National Gang Unit.
Yes.
The report identified a few critical issues that included a lack of documentation for inmate gang affiliations, an inaccessible disassociation program for inmates seeking to leave gang life, and inconsistent intelligence gathering and information sharing related to gang activities. While BOP has acknowledged the findings and is working to implement the 13 recommendations, one takeaway may be that extra scrutiny should be applied to ensure that they can be nimble in the face of a changing threat landscape. So on January 20th, President Trump signed an executive order establishing a process to classify certain cartels and other organizations as foreign terrorist organizations or specially designated global terrorists. Shortly thereafter, the State Department followed through by designating groups that encompass Aragua, MS-13, the Sinaloa Cartel, and the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, among others, as FTOs. How is BOP responding to this, given that some incarcerated individuals in their facilities may have pre-existing or ongoing relationships and affiliations with these organizations?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. So the Bureau is working closely with the department to implement the executive order. I believe that the responsibility for making the designation does not lie with BOP, that we will have to make changes within our process once that designation is made. With regard to our National Gang Unit, what I can tell you is that they are extremely active gathering intelligence in our facilities. There are National Gang Unit representatives, intelligence officers in every BOP facility, and they work hard to gather intelligence, determine what can be done to make the institution safer, and to counter gang activity.
Are you reshuffling priorities within BOP to ensure that there's consistency with documentation and intelligence gathering and information sharing as it relates to these groups?
Yes, we are very focused on the implementation of those recommendations, yes.
Okay, thank you. I want to move on to the widespread implementation of the First Step Act calculator in BOP facilities. The FSA calculator is supposed to be used by inmates and BOP employees for earlier pre-release planning by calculating a best-case scenario based on the inmate's federal time credits earning status. It was represented to the Judiciary Committee that the program was fully operational, and it was stated that the BOP has expanded the earned time credit calculator to do a full-on projection so that people can see if they behave in prison, they stay in programming and treatment, their earliest release date is X. But unfortunately, public reports have noted that the FSA calculator is not being applied uniformly across all BOP facilities, some cases not being used at all. In fact, inmates at FPC Montgomery reportedly went on a food strike after their case managers could not provide answers as to what the BOP's position was on the new calculations. And according to the reports, family members of inmates at that facility have voiced concerns that staff are retaliating against inmates who re-inquire about their FSA credits by taking away television time, visitation, computers, and microwaves, despite assurances that any errors are because of human input, not because of earned time credit calculator being broken. The failure of BOP to properly implement the calculators having vastly negative effects on inmates and causing confusion among staff. Can you update us on that and reassure us that that is no longer a problem?
Yes, Congressman. So I believe the situation in Montgomery, I think, was last summer or last fall. Since that time, we have issued additional guidance to the field about the calculation and the information that will be available to those in custody about their projected release dates. And that is the guidance that was given in November or December. So it's, insofar as I know, it is being followed in the field, and it was received well.
So you don't anticipate any further problems with the calculator?
I don't have any reason to think that will be the case, no.
Okay. Also want to follow up on a subpoena Chairman Jordan sent from Judiciary to BOP Director Peters back in April of last year for 3 categories of documents related to the Bureau's treatment of Biden impeachment witness Jason Galanis. The BOP responded saying her testimony, Director Peters' testimony, would fulfill the committee's request. Her testimony actually failed to answer basic questions from members about alleged sexual assault at the hands of BOP guards and the Bureau's denial of Galanis' application for home confinement under the rules of the CARES Act. Can you update the committee on the status of this internal investigation? Is the guard still employed by BOP? And when can we expect a response to the Judiciary Committee?
Congressman, I think I'll have to refer, the questions about the response to the committee will have to, that are best directed to the department. That was handled entirely through the department's Office of Legislative Affairs. So while BOP may produce information, the decisions about what to do with regard to that are at the department level, and I would refer you back. I do not currently know because this was an appropriations hearing, I do not currently know the status of that, but we'll be happy to look into it and provide what information we
You
can.
don't know if the guard's still employed?
I don't know the current status, no.
If you could get us that information, that'd be helpful. Thank you. Yield back.
Mr. Ivey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Klein, the subpoena issues continue, I hear. So I did want to follow up on a point he made with respect to the calculator, because I've heard similar things. Okay. And I would encourage you to double check. Whatever sort of follow-up mechanism you have or can put in place, we'd appreciate it. With respect to Congressman Carter, he also raised issues I wanted to follow up with as well. And that in turn, that was regarding prosecuting attacks on corrections officers. I looked at the October 2024 IG report, and it raised issues with respect to the need for additional video, in part for prosecution efforts. And I suppose that can go both ways. There might be inmate issues or vice versa. But, it raised the point that there's an additional need for video within. And I wanted to see if you could address that. I mean, how much would it take to do it? Do you agree that that would be helpful and necessary to add? How long would it take to get it done?
Thank you, Congressman. So I think in part that report refers to BOP's efforts to implement additional cameras, digital cameras consistent with the Camera Act. So I can tell you the status of where we are in terms of upgrading and replacing those cameras. Because certainly it is a very important tool for law enforcement for those prosecutions.
Absolutely.
So the camera upgrades really rely on two things: fiber optic installation and the availability of cameras. So we've completed the fiber optic installation at about 90% of our facilities. 4 facilities are completely finished with the fiber and the cameras. About 80 have camera installation ongoing. The fiber is complete, but the camera installation is ongoing. And there are 37 facilities awaiting either the fiber installation or the cameras. So we are about 40% of the way to where we need to be. We have a facility staff very dedicated to that, and they're working hard to get that done.
All right, and with respect to the storage time, it looks like there's maybe 14 days had been what typically happens, or at best, the suggestion here is 2 months, or if it's going to be used for prosecutorial purposes, 2 months or more at least, I would think would be in order. Are the new ones going to be able to store the data for longer periods than 14 days?
I would have to check on that for you, Congressman.
Okay, with respect to the point about drones, I think that was with respect to Ms. Dean's questions. I was curious about that point because the IG raised that as well. And you mentioned that there are some of your facilities that have the ability to use countermeasures or detection measures, I suppose. How many do not have the ability to detect drones?
So we have drone detection software at 64 facilities, so about half. About half
right.
of the facilities have it. 64, yes.
Are you in the process of adding the remainder?
We would like to expand the system. We don't currently have the funding that
Don't
we
have the
need
funding.
to
How much
have.
money do you need? How much additional funding would you need to get that done?
Congressman, that one we will have to follow up with you on.
All right, I appreciate it. Quick question on the phone calls. I don't know if I saw it in your testimony, but you mentioned it when you were testifying a few moments ago. Are you saying that there are some phone calls that are not charged, but some that are?
Oh, for the inmate phone calls?
Yes.
So, yes, so traditionally inmates have paid the cost of phone calls to family and friends for whatever. During COVID, under the CARES Act, BOP received funding to provide free phone calls to all inmates because visiting was restricted.
Right.
So we have now rolled that back because we no longer have the CARES Act funding. We've rolled that back so that individuals who are engaged in FSA programming can receive up to 300 minutes of free phone calls a month. Everyone else has to pay for their calls. So
How
if you're
much do
not
they have to-
programming,
How much do they have
the-
to pay for each call?
the FCC implemented new phone rates for calls. I think it went from 12 cents to 6 cents emitted in January, so we timed the change with the decrease in cost.
All right, great. And then, got a little bit of time left. I think you said that there are 4,000 beds that can't be used currently. I guess that's because of the crumbling facilities?
Correct.
And that would add up to around 2 or 3 additional installations?
It's the equivalent of 2 to 3 prisons, yes.
All right, and how much would it cost to get the facilities up to par so you could use the 4,000? Do you need the 4,000 additional beds?
We do need the 4,000 additional beds. Most of those beds are in low and medium security facilities, and the places we have the fewest amount of available beds are in low security facilities. So yes, it would be helpful to bring those back online.
Mr. Alford?
Thank you, Chair and Ranking Member. It's an honor to be on this subcommittee. Thank you, and thank you, Associate Deputy Director Toomey, for being here today. I'm glad we got the technical difficulties worked out. Associate Director, Deputy Director, do we have the best prison system in the world?
I think we have a very good prison
Do we have the
system.
best prison system in the world?
Congressman, I'm not sure I'm in a good place to evaluate that. I don't know every other prison system in the world, so I don't know that I can offer you an opinion on that.
Why are we not evaluating other prison systems throughout the world to find the best practices, the modernization that we need, so we can declare we have the best prison system in the world?
I don't think there's a reason that we're not doing it. It's simply outside of what BOP would normally do in terms of meeting its mission, right? We are very, very focused on promoting safety and security and getting the job done, the day-to-day job. But I don't know. I'm not aware that BOP has ever studied other
Would it be
countries'
worth
facilities.
funding such research so that we could find best practices, modernization techniques?
It could be worth it. I don't know, Congressman. It's hard to say. I mean, I think there are a number of places where additional funding would be useful, staffing, crumbling infrastructure, other things. So
Recently, on February 5th, there was a story that President Trump and the president of El Salvador had apparently struck a deal to ship detainees and other federal inmates to that country to put in their super prison. They treat prisoners a lot differently down there. I think the Secretary of State kind of ran a little interference on that and said that might not be constitutional. Haven't heard much talk of it, but they do treat prisoners much differently outside the scope of our Constitution. I'm not suggesting that, but are there some practices that could be adopted to modernize our prisons where we don't need as many humans, correctional officers in those facilities, to where we wouldn't have to worry as much about retention and placement?
Congressman, I think one of the things that's not well understood about BOP facilities is most housing units only have 1 or 2 corrections officers on them. So unless you're going to remove everyone from the housing unit, all the corrections officers, we don't have much to cut. It's not as if we have a lot of people working on each of those units. Each unit is usually staffed with 1 to 2 corrections officers, and that officer may be responsible for 120 inmates. So it is very leanly staffed. The staff is spread across 120 facilities in the United States, across several housing units at every one of those facilities. So I don't know how we compare to El Salvador or other countries, but what I can tell you is the staffing level in BOP institutions is already, I suspect, much lower than most people would think that it is.
There's $3 billion worth of deferred maintenance, as we would say in the housing business, for federal prison properties. Why not build a new prison for that cost? Or what would a new prison cost? Have you done any research on that?
There is research on it, Congressman. I cannot recall off the top of my head. We recently are completing a new prison at Leavenworth. And so we could certainly provide the cost of that to you. Yeah.
How many detainees, illegal aliens are going to be, how many different facilities are they going to?
The current agreement with DHS covers 5 facilities.
5 facilities, and how many total detainees?
I don't think that we have a cap in the agreement. I don't recall.
And what protections are being put in place to separate those from the federal general population in prisons?
So the detainees are put in separate housing units. They're not sentenced individuals in the same housing unit. They will be supervised by different, still BOP staff, but different staff, and their steps are taken so that they don't interact at any point.
And the intention is to have them housed there until they can be repatriated to their home countries?
I think, I don't want to answer for ICE in terms of the intention. We are providing bed space for ICE so they can fulfill their mission in terms of wherever those individuals are going. I don't know beyond that.
Okay. Thank you for your answers. I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Ming. It's an honor to be on this subcommittee. Thank you, Associate Director Toomey, for being here today. In the testimony, you had mentioned that there are 4,000 new hires, which is one of your best hiring years in a decade. And with a net gain of 1,200 new employees, of those 1,200 employees, because I don't know, how many of those are on probationary periods of time? Or how long is the
The
probationary period of time?
probationary period is 1 year.
1 year. So if they were hired later in the year, has there been any impact with the current cuts of probationary federal employees in the prison system?
We have not had any cuts at BOP.
Okay. Also, in your testimony, you had mentioned about healthcare. You're at 84%. And then also in the testimony, you had mentioned that there's a lot of off-service medical trips. Can you kind of dive into that and the importance of recruitment on the medical side and what that means long-term for spending?
Yes, so we have, it is difficult to recruit medical professionals. We compete in terms of salary. We also compete in terms of flexibility.
ask?
Yeah.
And it may be impossible, when you compete in the terms of salary, what that means?
So
I mean, is there a dollar figure or percentage that you're deficient on?
So I can't tell you, it differs from place to place across the
Sure.
country. What I can tell you is that we know that in certain metropolitan areas, for instance, BOP doctors may earn 10 to 20% less than doctors in the community. In terms of the overall, I'm sorry, Congressman, can you remind me of the question again?
I'm so
Yeah,
sorry. Tell me the advantage of being able to hire medical professionals in-house so that you can minimize the cost of taking them to outside sources.
So if we are able to fully staff medical in our facilities, we are able to provide more care, better care, more timely care in the facilities, which often can help alleviate the need to take someone into the community for a more advanced medical condition that's treated adequately within the facility. So that is one of the advantages.
You had, also in your testimony, you had a 19% decrease in separations.
Correct.
You had talked about the 35% incentive. What are other tangible reasons in which that occurred?
So the 35% retention incentive was at Brooklyn. The 19% was for BOP overall, a decrease in attrition. That, I think, is attributable largely to retention incentives. We also have been, as staffing levels at institutions rise, right, there are decreased mandatory overtime. It makes the conditions better, less stressful for the staff. So we are seeing institutions where we have individuals who are more willing to stay. We have mandatory law enforcement retirement at 57, but we do see people who come forward and say they'd like to stay for another year, and we have the ability to allow that.
Along the theme of retention, there have been calls from Congress and the BOP and unions to institute a nationwide special pay rate for federal correction workers. Can you discuss the importance of maintaining competitive pay rate and what actions Congress can take to support those wages?
So thank you, Congressman. The special pay rate was a proposal developed in the last administration. It would require both OPM approval and funding from Congress. It will be up to a new director to decide whether they would like to pursue that idea at this point. But what I can tell you is we know that recruitment incentives keep people in the institutions and allow us to increase staffing levels. So we know it works.
Do you do exit interviews as people are leaving?
HR does, yes.
Do you have any type of overall theme on why people leave?
People often leave because they can get paid better someplace else, they can get a more flexible job, and the work is less dangerous and less difficult.
And last question, what can we do as a member of Congress to help you increase your retention rates to hopefully lower costs?
Congressman, I can't comment on what Congress should do, but what I will tell you is that anything we can do to retain people, whether that means keeping incentives or offering other kinds of job benefits, are things that we would really welcome.
I thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Director, for being here. As you know, I represent nearly half of the southern border. A lot of people like to talk about the border. We live it. Places like El Paso, Eagle Pass, Del Rio, all in my district. Earlier this month, your agency stated that Bureau of Prisons is assisting ICE by housing detainees. Earlier, you said you're currently at 700. Reports have suggested that number may increase into the thousands. My first question is, do you expect DHS to ask for additional housing of illegal aliens?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I don't know. We are regularly communicating with ICE about how we can collaborate with them. I just don't know what they may request in the future.
I would not be surprised if they did, right? You have to house somebody that you're detaining. BOP makes a lot of sense for it. How much funding do you anticipate you will be needed in order to reach adequate staffing levels to maintain officer safety?
So the proposal, so we have, excuse me, I'm sorry, let me just find that. So we estimate that to implement, I think you're asking about the special salary rate. If that's what you're asking about, we estimate that it would cost $2.5 billion over 5 years to increase staffing levels and increase the pay of corrections officers once we're at the fully staffed level.
Got it. I mean, once again, this is the Appropriations hearing, right? We're looking at dollars and cents on how we get you to help meet your mission. I'm looking at the appropriated levels for fiscal year '24, $8.575 billion, okay? I'm looking at your request for fiscal year '25, $8.820 billion. And then I'm looking at what we appropriated. That's $245 million increase. I mentioned those levels. You're asking for more money to do more things as you're getting more missions from different things that I think are important, right? Housing illegal aliens is important to keeping Americans safe. My question is, how does a year-long CR impact your staffing and shortages?
A year-long CR means that we will operate at 2024 funding levels, which for BOP were the same as 2023 funding levels. We have absorbed, as I said before, 5% pay raise last year, 2% pay raise this year. That's a cumulative increase of about $500 million of additional salary. The effect is that we will continue to make the best, most responsible decisions we can make about how we use our funding, but we will have fewer and fewer discretionary dollars to spend.
Is that going to impact the operations, the DHS operations to house additional illegal aliens? Right now, you're at hundreds. I expect you'll be at thousands, maybe even more. Will that impact it in any form or fashion?
I don't know, Congressman. Right now, the agreement is that ICE will fully reimburse BOP for its costs, but I don't know how it might grow in the future.
I'd be very interested, and I think this committee would be very interested in ensuring that you have all the proper resources in order to tackle all your mission sets, to including the helping of other additional agencies. The president has made this a priority. Here in Congress, we've made it a priority. But a lot of people say it's a priority, and then they cut the check, and the check doesn't match what the priorities are. I want to help you make sure that you have all the funding levels you need in order to accomplish your mission and to keep Americans safe. So if we could please work together on that as we work through that, and the staff as well. I'm going to ask one state question, and then I'm done. There's a memo from the Congressional Programs Division last year authorizing officers to the use of MK4 gel spray, an alternative to your typical aerial spray on escorted trips to the hospital and doctor visits. This gel spray is widely accepted as a safer alternative, as general aerial sprays can easily travel into a hospital's HVAC system. My question is this: federal prisons in Texas are being told that they do not have the funds to purchase this gel spray. Can you speak to any funding that is allocated to our facilities to equip officers with the MK4 gel spray?
Any funding, Congressman, I don't actually know whether there's no additional funding for BOP. We pay for that out of our base budget.
I'd love for you to look into this. We got about 20 seconds left. I'd love for you to look into this. The current is everyone must use this aerial spray. I think as technology has evolved, there's other alternatives out there that may be safer for different folks. I'd love to just maybe follow up and have a deeper conversation on what the alternatives are, what are some of the challenges for getting them implemented. And once again, thank you for coming before. I look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Congressman.
Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Strong?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Toomey, I was pleased that you touched on the increasing use of drones around prisons to deliver contraband. You're no doubt aware the CCP-linked drone manufacturer DJI recently released a software update that permits its product to fly over previously restricted areas such as military bases, runways, and power plants. Ms. Toomey, can you share more about how drones have been illegally utilized at facilities operated under BOP's purview, and about the technology that you mentioned that you're looking to deploy?
Thank you, Congressman. So drones are used to fly over BOP facilities to drop contraband in the prison yard. They may fly, in some cases, they may fly as close to a housing unit, right, to attempt to deliver it on a roof or someplace else close to the building. The most common types of contraband introduced via drone are drugs and cell phones, maybe cell phone chargers.
Can you address how DJI's decision to allow drones to fly in restricted areas has further complicated efforts to ensure the safety and security of facilities operated by BOP?
Congressman, I can't comment on the specific change on that specific issue. What I can tell you is that we work with the FAA to have airspace restrictions at most of our facilities at about 109, so that we can decrease the likelihood that drones will come into.
What other emerging technologies do you see on the horizon that could similarly impede the safety and security of your prisons?
The emerging technology, so I will, cell phones are a significant risk in prisons. And so we are using and looking at additional technologies to detect and identify cell phones so that we can seize them and take them back
Thank you.
and also to stop it from coming in.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize and applaud the information sharing efforts of BOP through its intelligence and counterterrorism branch. I think that's great. I think people love to hear how you're working that. I'm pleased that BOP collects permanent information within the prison system and has proactively engaged across DOJ and partnered with DHS to ensure this information is shared with federal, state, and local law enforcement. Ms. Toomey, in our unclassified environment, could you discuss your current process for analyzing and sharing intelligence collected within the prison system? In particular, I'd like to hear about your processes for monitoring and analyzing prisoner communication.
Congressman, so we have our intelligence unit does a lot of work on to monitor inmate communications and phone calls. We have a phone system that inmates use that records the phone calls, and then those are reviewed and monitored by our intelligence unit.
Are those recorded and translated, transcribed, real time?
They are not.
They're not, okay. I can imagine this monitoring and analyzation puts a strain on your resources and personnel. As you look into the future, what tools and technologies could be implemented to assist these efforts?
Congressman, I think we are well aware of the need to be more efficient in terms of the analysis of those phone calls, and we are discussing the possible use of different technologies that would translate them or automatically transcribe them. I don't think I can provide you with more information in this setting about what that might be.
Thank you. I'd like to follow up on Mr. Ivy's question. There was a mention that you had 4,000 beds that are offline in need of repair.
Yes,
That would equate to 2 prison systems if that many bed spaces.
2 to 3. Yeah.
How much do you estimate it would cost to repair those? Would it be cheaper to repair or cheaper to build a new prison?
Congressman, we can get back to you with more information on that. What I will say is the repair of those beds are at existing facilities where the rest of the facility exists. So I don't know how it compares to new building, but we do think that's a very efficient way to add additional beds to a location that we already have that is working well.
Thank you for coming before us. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Toomey, for being here. Question that I wanted to touch on here, and it has to deal with the First Step Act, which, as you know, was enacted 7 years ago. And it not only prioritized recidivism reduction programming within the BOP, but requires that the Bureau work with nonprofits and other private organizations, including faith-based art and community-based organizations that will deliver recidivism reduction programming on a paid or volunteer basis. These types of programs are critical for ensuring that those who are released from prison do not end up coming right back. In 2022, the FSA annual report noted that the BOP received 11 external applications to provide evidence-based recidivism reduction programs, EBRRs. BOP approved 5 of those applications, with one of them being faith-based. The BOP did not give any information in 2023 report on the faith-based participation. So since the First Step Act became law, the BOP has received 8 external faith-based applications, and of those 8 applications, 5 were denied, 2 were approved, and 1 remains pending review. The 2 that were approved are productive activities, meaning that there are no external faith-based EBRRs operating in the BOP, with individuals across the BOP system currently on wait lists to participate in this programming. I don't understand why the BOP is not moving with more speed on a law that was signed into existence 7 years ago. So my question is, can you provide an explanation as to why there are no external faith-based EBRRs operating within the BOP almost 7 years after the enactment of the First Step Act?
Congressman, what I can tell you about the First Step Act is we take it very seriously. We work hard every year to expand the number of programs that are available. So both evidence-based recidivism reduction programs and productive activities, and those in custody can earn time credits for participating in both of those activities. With regard to a specific application, I don't know the background on that. What I can tell you is that the applications go to an office that looks at need, the qualifications of the organization, what it's offering, how it compares to other things that are being offered, and whether it meets the qualifications for something that can be an evidence-based program. That's what I can provide for you today.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I'd like some additional information on it in terms of what indicators were used or considered in the application and selection process, where under the First Step Act, they've denied 5 of the 8 faith-based applications. I think that's a really important part of this, and I'm just curious, why is that happening? Do you have any idea?
I do not know, Congressman, but we'll be happy to look into it.
Yeah, it's, of course, I have my own thoughts on it, but I'd love to understand why, because I think it's really important. You know, obviously I'm wearing my own faith here on my sleeve a little bit, but I think it is really important to have that as an aspect in terms of reducing recidivism, is, you know, trying to bring people towards faith and finding a new path in life. So I would love to have some more information on that, and I'd love to have those other applications approved.
Thank you, Congressman.
I yield back.
Is there a sentiment on the committee to have a second round of questions? Is there a desire for a second round? Yes, ma'am. All right. Well, is it okay to have a second round, madam?
I'm at your disposal, Congressman.
We'll get you out of here in due course.
Thank you.
We will do a second round of 3 minutes each rather than 5. And I yield myself to start. Harking back to the evidence that Mr. Strong brought out about repairs, and looking at your statement that you gave us earlier, you say that more than 4,000 beds are unusable due to crumbling conditions in the housing units. Is that an accurate number? 4,000?
That is an accurate number, yes.
That's the equivalent of 2 prisons
It is.
that can't be used because they're under repair or not.
Yes.
Now, what side effects does it have to have a prison with unusable beds or under construction?
So most of those beds are not under construction. They're just, some of them are. When beds are unavailable, what it means is it constrains the Bureau's ability to move people to communities where maybe they would be housed closer to their release location. It can create additional burden on staff because you may have units, existing housing units that become overcrowded at a particular facility. And it certainly increases the potential for very decrepit buildings, certainly increases the potential for danger to both staff and those in our custody.
Now, in your statement, you say that BOP developed a comprehensive 5-year capital plan for its major repair projects. Tell us about that.
So the plan breaks out specific categories of projects that will increase safety in our facilities. So for instance, replacing fire alarms, sprinklers, fire pumps, those sorts of things. It identifies a certain number of projects that are needed new roofs. There are 65 roofs just on the 5-year capital plan, and that is, roofs create, there's a danger, right? Unstable leaking roofs create a lot of danger in the facilities. The plan also covers security systems, so perimeter fencing, other kinds of things needed to secure the institution. The 5-year plan breaks down specific projects by category and by institution, and it also breaks out the cost over 5 years, each of the 5 years.
Well, that makes all the sense in the world. Common sense, as they say. Secondly, private prisons.
Yes.
The president recently issued an executive order allowing DOJ to renew contracts with private prison operators. How does the Bureau plan to integrate private facilities into the federal correction system?
Congressman, we're aware of the executive order and we're working on it with the department. What I can tell you is how we used private prisons in the past. In the past, BOP used private prisons to house non-citizens who were in custody. So from about 2017 to about 2020, BOP had a number of private prison contracts, and it housed several thousand individuals who were in custody and were non-U.S. citizens.
What's your considered opinion about private prisons?
Congressman, I don't have an opinion about private prisons. What I will tell you is that BOP spent about $400 million annually on the private prisons when we had them in the past. So without additional funding, we don't have the ability right now to greatly expand into private prisons, and exactly what we'll have to do will need to be decided by the administration.
Thank you. Ms. Bing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask in response to last month's memo from the administration encouraging federal employees to quit. How many BOP employees are quitting in response to the deferred resignation offer? And are you worried about resignations and their impact on safety in the prisons?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. Most BOP positions were exempt from the deferred resignation offer. The law enforcement positions were exempt, so we have a relatively small number of employees who are even eligible for that. So the number of, I don't know the total number of applicants, but the number of employees who we anticipate even could leave is below 100.
And then I wanted to go back about the MOU with the Bureau of Prisons and ICE. My understanding from the MOU that BOP will be reimbursed for the cost of housing, feeding, and other custodial responsibilities for the migrants. What's your estimate of the cost of feeding and sheltering those detainees? When is that money needed by, and how will it affect BOP operations if it's not provided to BOP?
Congresswoman, I don't have an estimate of exactly what it will cost. It will really depend on the number of individuals. But the agreement provides for reimbursement from ICE on a periodic basis. So I at this point, we've just begun this process, and so I think we're gonna have to wait and see a little bit how it is implemented and how it impacts BOP. I think it's too early for us to really say.
Okay. Do you know if the BOP staff at the 5 locations listed in the MOU have fluency in different languages that might be needed other than English to effectively communicate with the detainees?
I don't know about the staff specific at the facilities, but I know that the agreement with ICE provides for language line assistance and other things to ensure that detainees are able to communicate with whoever they need to communicate with.
And then lastly, do you know what the current staffing and augmentation rates at the facilities are?
I do not have those rates at this point. What I can tell you is that we believe that we can manage the increased mission within the staff available at those institutions.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Okay, this is gonna be a little strange story here. Back in the 70s, long time back, I was the president of the Round Rock JCs. And I got a call from the federal prison in Bastrop and asked me if they had done all the things that were necessary to form a JC club in the prison. And they asked me if I would come over and initiate, swear in all of their employees. It'd be at their opening event of their JCs, and it was first time I'd been in state prisons, but I had never been in federal prison. It was very, very interesting facility. Once we walked into this one room, you couldn't know if we were at the Round Rock swearing-in ceremony or the Georgetown ceremony or the Houston ceremony. They had a band playing. They had all these people were dressed up. They had their wives there, or spouses there, and everybody was dressed up. And it was a shocker to me. So I swore them in and visited for a little while, and decided since my wife was at home, I didn't need to stay for the dance, so I left. But that was a real interesting experience that I've never had before. Do clubs like JC's now more women than men, so it probably wouldn't be appropriate now. But I mean, do they still have clubs that come in and organize in the prisons that, like, I don't know, Kiwanis or something like that?
Congressman, I don't know about the club specifically. What I can tell you is that we do work with a lot of volunteer organizations in communities to come in to provide various types of programming, mentorship activities, other types of things with people in prisons. I think I can tell you, I feel fairly confident we no longer have bands in BOP facilities, but we do work with a lot of community and volunteer organizations to be able to offer additional services, interactions, other types of things that wouldn't.
Do you allow churches to come in and put on a church service?
To my knowledge, yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Say again.
Churches, I asked them if they allow churches to come and do a church service.
I
He
thought you
said
said, I thought you said turkeys.
No, I didn't say turkeys, I just said, you're listening out of the wrong ear, brother.
Mr. Ivey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did want to make a quick comment and then ask you a couple questions. I believe it was Mr. Moore had some comments about faith-based interaction inside the prisons. I don't have experience with them in federal prisons, but in the state prisons, I thought it's been very helpful for a couple of reasons. One is it helps with the transition for people who are in, and sometimes they then have a community that's waiting for them when they come out. The other part too, though, is that sometimes the best people doing the work are ex-offenders themselves. And if that's one of the reasons that the applications are being turned down, I hope that will be reconsidered. I know that frequently in federal grants, they have reservations about that, but this, I would suggest this might be a special exception. I did want to ask you about Dublin. Just reading about this, I know that's been shut down, but I guess there was years of abuse, and these are, I guess, prison officials who were involved in sexual assaults and harassment with women in that institution, and there were 100 survivors, led to a settlement of $115 million. I don't know if the courts accepted that settlement or not, but what steps, other than shutting down Dublin, because I've got a quote in here from one of the advocates saying this is not a Dublin problem, this is a BOP problem. What steps is the BOP taken to make sure that this doesn't happen anywhere else, and we're not exposing taxpayer dollars to the tune of $115 million to these kinds of settlements?
Thank you, Congressman. So I think one of the main changes that BOP BOP's done a number of things. One is we really value our collaboration and partnership with the Office of Inspector General, which investigates those cases. We have significantly expanded our Internal Affairs Office to be able to handle more cases, more investigations, especially that look into allegations of employee misconduct. And those are two main steps that we've taken.
Just along those lines, in the IG report, it mentions a call for an independent ombudsman. Actually, that might be part of the 2024 Federal Prison Oversight Act. Is that in place, or is that sort of what you were talking about a moment ago?
So the changes at BOP are specific to BOP. The Oversight Act does require appointment of an ombuds to take in complaints from families, people in custody, other advocates, others, regarding conditions in BOP facilities. The ability to appoint the ombuds is not with BOP, it is with the department, and so I think we are working with the department on implementation of that provision.
So Main Justice, you mean, Department?
Yes, yes.
Okay, and who there would be in charge of making that decision?
Congressman, I'm not sure exactly who it would be, but we are working with them to discuss how best to implement that act and what that would look like.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Got to push the talk button. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, round two. What did you say was the starting salary again of a federal corrections officer?
It starts at about $49,000, depending on the area, 49, and it can go up to 59,000.
Are these men and women typically experiencing some sort of protection or criminal justice degree? Where do they come from?
Many of our applicants come from, they may have a 4-year degree, they may have studied criminal justice or something else, and we hire a number of people who come out of the military, so that may be their experience. Those are two primary paths.
Why should someone want to be a federal corrections officer? Given the inherent danger and given the relatively low income, why would someone want to be a federal corrections officer?
For the mission. I think the people who work in the institutions every day will tell you that it is an amazing mission, right? That they are working very, very hard to make the public safe and to rehabilitate people in our custody. And that is, I think, people believe deeply in that mission.
So it's a service,
It is a
service above
service.
self, really, service for your country
Yes.
and our security. Is that the marketing message you use? The Army has used several in the past. Army of One, they're back to be all you can be. Their recruitment is now up. They've met their recruitment goal last year. What marketing messages do you use?
So we focus very heavily on being part of a team and being part of the mission. BOP revised its entire recruitment strategy a couple of years ago to really focus on those types of messages. We'd be happy to share some of our recruitment ads
I'd love to see that.
via link. We're very proud of them.
Not on TikTok, though, right?
Not on TikTok.
Okay, good. Are you going into college campuses personally, like Army and military recruiters do?
We go into college campuses, we go into trade schools, nursing schools. We have a internship program for psychology students, which allows us to bring people in and then hire them once they've gotten their degree. We recruit at any number of different local employers. The local institutions go out locally, and our National Recruitment Office participates in job fairs. We have our own job fairs.
And what is your line item for recruitment?
I would have to check that number for you,
I'd
Congressman.
like to see that,
Sure.
and if you need more money for that, we want to get behind you. We want to have the best prison system in America with the best Americans helping in this effort. So thank you for your service to our great nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have you ever evaluated medical cost of in-house versus privatization to see which one is most cost-effective?
Congressman, I would have to check. I'm not aware of that, but it doesn't mean we haven't done it. I'm just not aware of it as I sit here today.
I can tell you, previously a county mayor, county commission chairman, I had about 1,300, 1,400, which is small, but in a metro jail, and that was one of the biggest savings we were able to do is we privatized the medical. What is your average cost per meal for each of the inmates?
Again, Congressman, I would have to, we could get you that data, but I don't have the average cost per meal.
That was another thing that we did. We privatized, and whenever we privatized, we brought it down to less than $1.50 per meal. They provided a dietitian, and it saved an enormous amount of money. Might be worth looking into. Does the federal prison system either sell or offer coffee and cigarettes to people that are in that facility?
We have a commissary, yes, that does provide a wide range of goods.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank our witness, especially Administrator Nelson, for being here with us. Being frank and open, we thank you for that. As you await the appointment of a new director, we wish you all the luck in the world in running the shop while we're waiting on a new boss. So thank you for your service. You've got a tremendous resume. You've been a great public servant and still are, and we're all depending on you to carry out this very important chore. So thank you for being here today, and thank you for your service.
Thank you so much, Congressman.
Without objection, members may have 7 days to submit additional questions for the record. The subcommittee stands adjourned.
Good start. Everyone showed up.
Thank you. Sorry if I was late. They're stuck across.